This is Abigail Carl Clausen. I'm here today with Billy Froese, and he's going to tell us a little bit about his experiences here in the Campos Menonitas of Chihuahua and the rest of his travels. So thank you for participating, for being here today.
Yeah.
So just to start out, can you briefly introduce yourself?
Yeah, name is Billy Froese, actually Guillermo. I was born in Cuauhtémoc and did the seasonal thing, travel from Canada to Mexico. Still kind of doing that. So.
Yeah. And can you describe your family background a little bit and the connections here to the Campos?
Yep. Both my father and mother were born here and raised here in the Campos in a very traditional way when it was still horse and buggies. And I was born here and grew up here somewhat, or did the thing in Canada for some years, but then my mother passed, and then still kept doing the seasonal thing. And my dad actually left me at my aunt and uncle in Coppoline. Mm-hmm. So my dad was kind of, all his siblings, they stayed in the traditional communities, and he kind of left to do the Canada thing. So I got a taste of the more traditional way with my aunt and uncle. Been staying with them for some years.
Mm-hmm. And so that time that you were with your aunt and uncle, that was up in Capulin, and then that was in the 1980s, 1990s, early.
Yeah, 1980s, and yep, and I might have come home 1992. I'm not 1991, 1992. I came home. I was there for 5 years.
Yeah. So what did daily life look like in Capulin for you and your family during that time?
There was very secluded. It was they still had the horse and buggy, and they didn't have the electricity. And it was usually that the father would go once a week to Casas Grandes, to the town. And he would take one of the kids. Usually he'd take one of the kids with. Sometimes my aunt went as well. But that was the most that you would leave the colony. Mm-hmm. And so, of course, the father would leave on a regular basis like that. Sometimes the wife would go as well, the woman. And every now and then, or the kids would get a turn. And so I might have gone, while I was there, I might have gone once a month to town. And that was very exciting because you'd go to the end of the colony and you'd get on a bus, you go to town.
Yeah.
But otherwise, it was very secluded. They had a cheese factory, so they did that. But are you wanting to know about school or those things?
Sure.
As well?
Yeah. What was that like out in the colony?
Yeah. So I did start the school there as well, and what they call Fibla, just the basic learning to write. I mean, they have Fibla through, I guess you go through steps, Fibla, and then Kirkism, Catechism, and then eventually Bible, but you finish by the time you're 12 or 13. Mm-hmm. So I just got 2 years of that, but then I came home here to Cuauhtémoc, and then it was different. I think we did try the old colony school here a little. My dad had kind of left that years ago already, but then we started going to the German Church of God here.
And so what were some of the differences that you noticed coming back here to the Cuauhtémoc area from Capulin at that time in the early 90s?
It was already more contact with the Spanish or Mexicans in general. I mean, it was open. There, Capulin was still off to the side, and still is. and the town is quite a distance, and here you have it so close to Cuauhtemoc, so it was almost unavoidable. I mean, you still had that kind of mentality where we stay to ourselves, but it's not so easy here, or it wasn't so easy here. And there it seemed more actually like a gated community. Now if I think about it, felt more like that, because you go off the highway and you drive a ways, and then you're in the colonies, and there's no the town's not so close.
How long did it take by bus from Capulin to Casas Grandes? I've heard that was quite a bus trip.
That one, it wasn't. Oh, out of the colony back then with the roads and stuff like that, it might have taken an hour. Yeah. But it felt especially long since you got over half of that dirt road. And so for a period of time, your dad was a old colony school teacher here in the Manitoba colony. What were the old colony schools like in this area here? And then what are some of your most memorable experiences from that old colony school system? I think even then the old colony schools here were very similar to what they would have been in Capulin. And it was the same thing. I've always wondered, I need to talk to him about this, how he actually, I still find it hard to believe. Over the years, I've just always seen his books, like where he wrote in stuff, but I've always wondered, I still find it hard to believe that he was an old colony teacher. But I think for him, it was very much the way it was. And my experiences, my most memorable experiences in the school are positive. They're interesting, but not so positive. That was usually getting punished. But if you want to know about that, I can say that would definitely be interesting. But I mean, most of those methods are to shame a person. Like they even have you heard about this, the Froese Bank?
No, go on.
Because I don't know if they have it to this day, but they had it then. And I'm sure my dad had it in his school, but they had it in Capulin. The Froese Bank is the teachers up front. The girls are on one side, the guys are on one side. That's also can be a punishment. You go sit with the girls. And I, at one time, thought that was a punishment. But no, the Froese Bank is the lazy bench. And so if you're not doing your work or you're not doing something, up there beside the teacher, there's a bench, this hard bench, and you go sit up there in front of the students. That's kind of... So there's those kinds of things. There was, I mean, of course, there was spankings, stuff like that. But there was also where they had these big windows and you had to stand in the window facing the street. So if people passed, they could, they knew.
You were being the bad child.
So those are my, that's nice. I'd like to say something positive. I enjoyed it. It was good. It was good times, good school. But I mean, that's just something. That's just the way it was.
Yeah, for sure.
And I also remember, like, I'm left-handed, and this is another thing I'm not so sure about nowadays. I think some schools, like Capulin, they would still do it. I don't think around here maybe, but you shouldn't be left-handed. Like everyone should be right-handed. So I just remember the teacher coming to my desk and putting the pen in my right hand, or the chalk, whatever it was. Then we had those little tufels, or those little chalkboards. And the chalk. But no, we did also write in books. So he would start me off writing, and then he would leave, and I would just put it back in my left hand. I think this isn't going to work with my right hand. But I managed to still be left-handed. Because some people, they do unlearn that. Yeah,
for sure. For a period of time.
But those are my most memorable. It wasn't all bad or negative.
And so when you were growing up, what kinds of interactions did you and your family members have with Mexicans? And were your family's interactions considered typical for that time?
They were not, with my dad, it was not typical. I mean, but no, even here in Cuauhtemoc, the typical, it was in a sense typical because the interactions were business. And that was acceptable. Like, but church, not so much. But it was more in Copaline, it was more definite, or because there I remember these phrases, and I think, I don't know if I heard them at home. I think every now and then, even when I came home, there was these comments like, oh, if you don't behave, the Mexa warranty or the Mexican will get you.
Yeah.
But it was that mentality was much more in Copaline, like, because the Mexicans would come, like my aunt and uncle had a cheese factory, and they would come once a week, maybe. I don't know if every week, but they would come to pick up cheese, but they would also, Mexicans would come to sell fruit or sometimes different things. I remember the Mexican coming, one guy from town always coming to sell fruit.
Yeah.
And that was always very exciting. Like, and he was a very friendly guy. He liked kids and always made jokes. We couldn't understand anything he said, but my uncle would translate or whatever, or he would be the in-between talk. I remember that guy, and that was always good. But so they would, especially there, they would come from town every now and then and sell, and that was very interesting and it was exciting. But would it also be used like, oh, they weren't in Matnam, oh, they'll take you with.
Yeah.
That was more definite. That was a more, I guess the more cut off they were, like Copaline, more than here, that would be more used.
Yeah.
And more as a fearful thing, like you had no idea that and more of this, that das Weltmenschen, they were worldly. And so that was a scary thing.
Yeah.
But weird, when they were there, like selling fruit, it was friendly and happy. And
Yeah.
wow, these are human beings.
Yeah. And so you mentioned that your dad had some kind of like atypical interactions with Mexicans. What are some of those?
Well, there's the wrestling thing. Like, he did join, and that was brief. I wish it would have been longer, but somehow he got into this business with, and it was another dicha, but they joined with some Spanish in Cuauhtemoc, and for a short time they had these wrestling matches. And there was kind of a big deal. Some of these bigger guys would come and wrestle. Of course, they had all their, they actually had extreme tactics for effect. Like, they would use glass to cut each other just on the surface of their skin to make it. But then I forget how it was that my brothers got reeled into that, because my brothers were watching when they practiced. Like, they set up these rings in town, my brothers were watching, and then they were just playing in the ring. And they were teenagers. And then they said, hey, maybe this would be a good thing, these guys do the introduction. And my brother Isaac even did this thing where I forget, how do I say it? He acted like a girl or whatever. Yeah. Like, hey, this is going to sell. And so he even did this act or whatever, feminine thing, and then, or just for amusement, and people loved it. But whatever, there must have been something that I'm not aware of that happened with my dad in the business, and that it fell out. But that was brief and very interesting little episode. Yeah. But the thing, and that, in that sense, my dad, he never had a problem working with Mexicans, and he spoke Spanish, but that was acceptable in general anyway. Like, that was unusual, the wrestling thing. I don't know of any other people that did that, but in general, business was accepted, but the lines were drawn when it came to church or even school.
So for a period of time, you worked in a rehab center in the Campos that primarily serves people from an old colony background. Was that 2014? When was that?
Yep. Yeah. I think, 2013 or 2014.
So talk a little bit about the history of the rehab center, and then your experiences there working at the rehab center.
Yeah, I think it actually started an old colony preacher, Altista, Froese. Just saw the need that alcoholism and drugs were quite a problem and actually needed to do something, and he worked together with some of these other preachers. So I think that was a good thing there, with from different denominations, and actually somebody from the old colony and then working on this. And he donated the land, and I think at first the idea was to make it also for the Spanish or for Mexicans, and they tried that and were not able to make it work. And part of that was just the language. Like they couldn't really get the workers enough dicha. I mean, most dicha do speak Spanish, but not enough dicha that would actually understand or get the differences and be able to address that. And most Spanish don't learn German. So that didn't work out. But by the time I was there, it was already, I think even that first year that they realized that, no, we're just going to keep it beach.
Yeah. And about what year did it open, more or less?
Was it in the early 2000s?
Early 2000s.
Yeah, I wish I knew that date, but it has been open now about 15 years. And then at first it was just for men.
Yeah.
And later opened for the women as well. And now, I mean, they do keep them separate. And if they really want, if there's an issue, especially, well, usually people that end up there have marriage problems, or it is a problem, their marriages are broken because whatever. And then even if the man is the one with the alcoholism or whatever it is, they do want the wife to come as well. Or they encourage it and try to do it that way to where they can get them together and counsel and things like that.
Yeah.
But yeah, by the time I was there, it was separate like that. And then just for the evening services, they would have them, or just for church, they would have them all in one room. But still kept them separate.
Yeah.
And do you also ask about how my time there was?
Yeah. What were your experiences like working there?
Yeah, definitely a lot of old school ways of thinking that people that come in there. A lot of these things where with the men, like, oh, I'm the man and I and that's, I think, where a lot of problems are. Like, gotta be the man, gotta make sure to show it, things like that. And so, but they also, I mean, I think they've come a long way with the rehab. Like, I had suggestions there, and some of them were taken about being more therapeutic. And, some of it is, in my view, too old school, as far as there's still, in a sense, not so much. I mean, but there are still some things where it's kind of this idea, oh, we've got to shame them. Like, which I find amusing, and I don't think it's overdone. Like the men doing their own laundry, of course, that's great. But not only that, they don't get a washer, like they have to hand wash it.
Oh, yeah.
But I don't think it's extreme. I think that's very amusing. It's That's fine. That's not over the top. But there are some other things where it's like, where the idea, or it's thought that the idea is that they have to make it harsh. But it isn't. At that, considering what some of these other rehabs in the area are, it's not harsh.
Yeah.
Because they get good food and things like that.
Yeah.
But I think it's good. I think they've come a long way, and I think there's more to do in terms of being therapeutic or whatever. Like, not just, let's try to make these people miserable so they can see their need. I don't know.
Yeah. And about how many people can they serve at a time?
On the men's side, if they have 30, 40 I think is full. 40 is full, and it was always kind of filling up. But every 3 months they get out, and so it kind of works. But the women's side was usually not as full. And yeah, so in total it might be 50, and then they're if you both sides together.
Yeah.
Then they're full.
Yeah. And what did kind of like a daily life kind of look like? What did a normal day at the center look like?
In the morning they would have their classes, and they were usually modeled or based on the 12 steps. And then in the afternoon they would have activities, or for some of those, not at first when they came in. And I guess on the women's side, I was only involved there. Like, I would bring some classes and I would only go there to do that. I didn't notice as much as what they did, but I think usually they did some sewing, things like that. Yeah. And on the men's side, they'd go into the workshop. But some of them would stay back and either do Bible studies, or they would just have their own time to read and study like that. Yeah. But one of the things, one of my suggestions there was to do something for health or workout, and then they're like, "Oh, you're the guy that could lead that." So I enjoyed that, but also regretted it, because it's like, oh dang. Because there's not this. Especially in the old school, their exercise and workout, like
it's this completely foreign thing. Like what? Yeah. And then especially the older men, but even some of the younger men, like, you won't see me doing jumping jacks. Yeah. I feel so silly. Yeah, for sure. So sometimes it was fun. Like, it was funny the way the men reacted, or the things they said. Like, seriously. But it was a challenge for me, but it was good. Yeah. But there was jogging. Some of them actually just downright refused. Like, they wouldn't even jog. Yeah. Nope. Wabla school. I'm just gonna walk. Like, that was completely dead. Yeah. Why would I run? Yeah. No, exactly. And so you mentioned other rehab centers in the area that you had visited, had seen. Talk a little bit about like what those were like, and how that compared with the rehab center that you were working at.
Well, the one I heard about the most, I mean, you'd hear about them in Cuauhtemoc, and you'd hear that they were always harsher. And see, here it is, this thing where it kind of turns out racial, because it is these Spanish rehabs, and they're, at least in the area, and I'm sure there are some really good ones, but the ones that you always heard about were not so good. At least and in Namakhipa always sounded like a scary place. Well, it is, and I visited there, a guy that ended up there. But so it turned out racial, like, the Maxa, rehab. So you still had that, and which I wish it wouldn't have been like that. Yeah. But Namakhipa, I can surely say it was just not a good place. Yeah. But then, because you'd hear horror stories, and the thing was, at the rehab there, they do try to work without. I mean, it's really tricky without force or even physical punishment. Like they don't.
And that's not the one that you worked at.
Yeah. The one I worked at. Like they don't do physical punishment. And every now and then that they've had to, where somebody comes in there and they're just so aggressive that they've had to put them in a room and just close it. But then when they just don't know what to do, they'll call the cops, and you really know that whenever you call the cops, you have no idea it's not going to go well. And they usually take them to Namakhipa. Yeah. So as much as I know, I would actually like to know about some rehabs in the area that are decent.
Yeah.
But I know Namikipa is not one of them, and it just so happens it is run by Spanish, and so it turns out to be this racial thing, or it makes it look like, oh, the Dicha do this nice rehab and the Spanish don't, which I know is not the case, or I know there's good rehabs. I just don't know of them.
Yeah.
But Namikipa was always the one, and then, which, yeah, when I visited there, I was, because a guy ended, and that was the thing, that was even this thing at the rehab, like, hey, die mans ophossen, die waschte Namikipa. So it was still kind of, in a sense, even if you don't want it to be, it turns out that way, like the racial thing. But now it wasn't that people would say, oh, de Maxa, but Namikipa was kind of a synonym, like, almost, or it turned out that way.
Yeah. And so during your time there, I'm sure you had a lot of different experiences, a lot of people coming in with a lot of difficult issues with addiction, issues with different stuff. In your opinion, what are some things that can be done to address substance abuse and its impact on individuals and families here in the Campos?
I think definitely, I mean, it's not always the case, but I think definitely start with the youth, or like that's been kind of neglected, where it's just, there's this idea of, well, oh, it's just, or that is, especially in the old colony, not just the old colony, but the traditional, where even in these cut-off communities like Koppelin, it's very much the idea is that just let them do that. And then there is, there has been, now it's changing in this area. I heard just recently, I need to inquire more about that, but I heard just recently that even the old colony has now built a gym in some areas.
Yeah.
And that to me is huge. But it was even 15 years ago, well, no, it's now 20 years ago, but even in Seminole, Texas, like there was this brief time where we went to the old colony, and I remember sitting there in church, and they usually have their sermons by a book, like sermons that were written over 100 years ago. They're still going. They still go pretty much read those, but at the end they'll have a rant about either the way people dress, or back then it was about baseball, like, oh, the kids are playing baseball, and some, I don't think, and so that's changed in Seminole, but I think it's changing here too. I think it's changing, slowly changing, but I think that would help a lot to have alternatives for the youth activities, because where it's not tolerated, parents leave their DARP or their village, and they're passing their kids with a group of kids just parked beside the road, and they've got their trunk open, they're mixing their drinks. Like, that should be unacceptable. Or it should be that any parent in that DARP should be able to say to this group, hey, you guys, if this is going to happen, it's got to happen somewhere safe, at least, at the very least. But even that, it shouldn't be accepted, tolerated. I get it that you let, like, you can't control it that much.
But like younger kids, like younger teenagers even, like you'll see out on
the road. 12, 13, and they're driving.
Yeah.
So I think a lot could be prevented, and a lot of those kids grow up that way, and then whenever they do get baptized, they stop whatever it is they think they should stop for their baptism classes until they're baptized, and then it kind of continues, and then it turns into a disaster in marriages and homes, and
Yeah. So you graduated from Steinreich Bible School and now work there as a teacher and librarian. What are some of the ways that the school has interacted across cultures during your time there? And what are your hopes for future cross-cultural interactions at the Bible School?
Yeah, it's actually very limited. I mean, it's still kind of, but I feel like it's positive in a way. They're not, I don't get any sense of this ode maxa. But you don't get any sense of this ode maxa, but you still do get a sense of this ovidice. Like there's still, like you don't get the negative, but you get it just to where ovidice, there's still kind of this, and I don't know with the school how it could change real fast. I think it is slowly. I think it's okay for it to be Deitch and to address Deitch needs, but it is tricky to not not it be like us and then all the rest of the world. But throughout the years there have been interracial couples and still there was, I don't know why that stopped, but there was always this Spanish class, Anabaptism Spanish teacher. And that's happened too, where there have been some for different classes or courses where there is Spanish. And every now and then they have Spanish speakers for events, stuff like that. Like they're not close to it at all, but there is still a sense of Vidice. And I guess you still have, I guess some of the biggest things happening at the school is where they do mission work, either with the Spanish or for the Spanish or for the Tarahumara. But as far as the school itself, the classes and that, it's all Deitch, and which I think is fine. But I think, and throughout the year, I think where it's happening more and more is throughout the year they're using the facilities for events, and they'll have school there with the Tarahumara, and they'll have like if an evangelist comes and he wants to do something there, like it's not closed. So I think more and more of that will happen. And eventually, that's a long time. I think it's a long time, but eventually I think it will happen here as it has in Manitoba, where it mixes, or Manitoba or Saskatchewan or BC, where they just mix more and more and kind of, it's not at all about Deitch, but that's a long way away here. Because the school intends to stay Deitch, Plot Deitch, because there are so many needs for the Plot Deitch, and I wouldn't know how else to do it.
And what are some of the specific needs that the school meets for Plot Deitch people? What do you say?
It's definitely and some of these, like, I mean, it does come out of the old colony, but it isn't just old colony, where they've left the education or didn't get schooling. Like some of their schools, even in the DARPA, they're till you're 13, and it's very, and with the schooling, it hasn't been valued. And then so a lot of times, the way it happened in colonies, the person would end up being a teacher. Oftentimes the guy that wasn't very ambitious or that wasn't really doing anything, it was like, oh, this guy could be a teacher. And that sometimes happened to work. They were right. Sometimes they were wrong. And this guy isn't really doing anything, so you can be the teacher. And, and then you'd often have teachers that weren't suited for it or didn't care for it. But even where you had good teachers, it was still very, you just learned to write and read, but not even that. So that's a big need. And then in general, just knowledge and Bible knowledge and Bible. So you have these colonies that have the Bible as their book, but nobody really knows what it says. And now later, it's like, oh, what does it say? So I think the school is good for it. Or one of their big ideas is to let anyone that has a desire to learn start wherever they're at. So you get guys from Canada that have gone through schools there, and you get people from Bolivia that have gone through basically nothing. And so even this year, there's people that really can't write, barely read. That's tough. But I think that's one of the biggest things for the school. And the way they're set up is very, in a sense, very communal. I mean, it's usually the case with schools, but they're very still tight-knit, communal, where you eat together and sing together. And I think that's meeting a need. So.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. So in the fall of 2017, you attended International Plodich Media Conference that was hosted here in the Campos. Talk a little bit about those experiences and the conference's goals and attendees.
Yeah, for me, the most positive experience there was the workshop, the language workshop. And that was the reason I went. They had different workshops, and I thought it was really good. Like, they had some on media or how to work with media and get stuff out there, and some artwork workshops, things like that. I went to the one with the language, and that's what I went for. So you got these different, you had different missionaries from Bolivia, and they're working, and that's where some of the biggest needs are right now among the Indicha communities, because they're very held separate, and they're excommunicating people, and some of these people don't know where to go or what to do. So, but so you had missionaries from there, and you had people from here, from Canada, and even some from Deutschland or from Germany, and a few of these Mennonites that even came. Well, I mean, Victor Sawatsky does come out of Russia. Some of these Mennonites that stayed back or weren't allowed to leave stayed back, and they're trying to work out or get a standard for German. And I think that's going to be great if that happens, because now when you read stuff, doesn't all, especially if you read Plotich out of Germany, it's something way different than here. And so at first with that, it was this pressure. I mean, the most intellectual and highest standards would come out of Germany, and that's what they wanted it to be. And these missionaries out of Bolivia were like, you just can't do that. You gotta bring it down to where people can understand it, or not start so high. So they're trying to find a middle balance, and I think they're finding it. I think they're progressing with that. I'm excited about that. And it's made me think of maybe writing stuff in Plotich, but that would be a real task for me. But I'm considering that, like, maybe I think depends on how much. It would be a bit strenuous for me, but I can read it. I don't have trouble reading it with some practice. Writing it, I'm so unsure. It's like, got to look up every word. Well, how should I spell this again? But in a way, it is one of those languages where you spell it more the way it sounds. Like but so I think they're making progress, and I might go to the next one, 2019 in Germany. But I feel like if I go, they're trying to get people together that are working with the language and actually doing something. And that's why I feel like, well, if I want to continue going, I would like to make a contribution, or in some way to actually be doing something with the language. That's where, so I'm thinking, okay, maybe I should write something. And so I might do that. I won't want to be careful when I say.
And so some of the people that were attending there, what were some of the projects like they were working on, or some of the longer term goals they had for Plodich, or making content in Plodich? Yeah,
I guess some of the most content that is being made is out of Bolivia, and they're already making content. They already have made content. And wow, now I can't remember. They did, a few of these people did agree to, well, I'll forget that, but the biggest work that I think they are making is these people that are already making the content are going to work on the standard. They're just going to make a standard and try to figure that out. And to me, that's one of the biggest steps. And it really felt like they'd come away since I wasn't at the previous. This was the fourth one. They had first had one in. The first one had been in Paraguay. Second one had been in Paraguay. Where had the other one been? Or maybe this was the third one. Yep. But from hearing about the previous ones, it did feel like they had taken a big step now, or they had come a ways and they had taken a step. And so I think, the most production is out of Bolivia. And that's where there was actually some actual linguists there. And they're working with this, and out of Paraguay. And I think it's good that at these conferences they do have people from Mexico, from these different areas, because if it just comes out of Paraguay, it's going to sound a lot different. And I think there will be a balance if you got these guys from, and that was the big thing. Ed Zacharias was there, the guy that translated the Low German Bible. And see, he was there, and he's kind of an authority, and like people would ask him, why did you translate it this way? And a lot of times he didn't have these profound answers that people wanted, and he was just like, that was just the word I knew, or picked. Like, it was real simple. And so some people have been frustrated with the Plotice translation because of some of the spellings and some of the words. I guess the J's used too much, they said. But there's other things, there's some, which I felt that way too with the Plotice. I'm like, there could have been a better word for that. But, but Ed was like, he can see that it needs to be revised or improvements made. But said at the time it was just he wanted to translate, or he felt that it needed to be translated. And there were other people, like there was a team, but I think Ed was one of the main guys, and they just went with what they knew. And later, but now you have something to work with, or something to see, something to improve.
It started the process, and then
and I think continues. That's going to happen. And there's these other guys that have already made the dictionaries from Plotice to English to where you can find these words. I think that's a big. That had already happened, but this Jack, I forget his last name. Jack, he's a big name there.
Thiessen?
Maybe.
Yeah.
But he's a big name among the Plotice conference there. But he's one of the big guys working with the. I think he just recently made a new.
The big dictionary.
Yeah.
Cool. So you mentioned at the beginning of the interview that as a child and now also as an adult, that you had often traveled back and forth between Mexico and Canada for work and for family. How has this cycle of leaving and returning to the Campos impacted your perspective on life in the colonies and just on life in general?
It's definitely helped me see it from different angles, in Canada. So that is always, even to this day, over here, even to me now, it seems strange, but it shouldn't, when people speak Spanish in their homes here. But they've lived here all their lives, and it's very unlikely. You have the few families that do, and especially the ones that intermarry. But if they're not intermarried, it's very unlikely that they'll speak Spanish in the home, and you move from here to Canada for a year or two, and they speak English in the home.
Yeah.
And even, and I don't know what it is. I guess it is maybe culturally more similar that the Canadians or Americans are to the Diche, then maybe there's a bigger difference here and with the language. But over there, it's just 1 or 2 years, and even there, it was more likely that they would go to public schools and not, like, it hasn't happened here. Well, it's still not happening. I mean, it's still, even now, if somebody would, like, you have these schools that accept the other races, but that's still limited, and it's just unlikely that you'll have grade school go to any Spanish school. But that happens out there real fast.
Yeah.
Even there was another thing I was gonna. Yeah, I don't know if you want to specify on that question, but there was something
Yeah, just how that traveling back and forth had changed how you had thought about life in the colonies, or just life in general, or just how that impacted your worldview experiences.
Yeah, seeing how some of that has changed, and where it's grown closer, where you do have some Spanish coming to church, but that has changed for sure. Where you have Mexicans coming to a Dicha church, a few, like Blumenau has it, and that's kind of amazing to me because they are, in some ways, more. I don't know if traditional, but they're more formal. Like they're. But I guess that fits with the Spanish culture because when it comes to church, they're more formal. But. And you have Dicha going to Spanish churches, but you still don't have the school thing. Yeah. So you have Dicha going to Spanish churches, things like that. Yeah. But it's just way easier that it mixes up north than it does here. So I am in some ways surprised how it has changed, and things have integrated, but how separate it still is. Like how. There are still lines, and some unspoken lines are just where you don't realize it until you hit the line. Yeah.
So you had mentioned that Capulin had undergone some pretty significant changes since you had been there as a child. What were some things that you'd noticed that had changed in Capulin?
In Capulin now they did. Now, of course, I think it was in 2000 that they got the vehicles and electricity, and that changed things. And but they still have, like around here, like I was saying, they would have. I think very recently they built some gyms, and they're playing sports. That has not happened in Capulin, and I don't think it will soon. It could, but they do have a community house for events. That's different. That they've never had before. And of course, with the vehicles, there's a lot more going to town and back, and not just. But there it is still. Like so, around here, back then it was always just the man knew Spanish because he did the business. He went to town. And the woman stayed more in the house, literally at the house. But that's still the case in Capulin. More. I mean, she'll leave town now more too, but probably not very likely that she would go to town. She'll always go with. But
and the same thing for Spanish, like still woman primarily speaking Plotich in Capulin.
Yeah, it's unlikely that they'll. But the girl, no, like the teenagers now, the girls might be learning Spanish.
Yeah.
But that's still more here. Now that's a big difference here, where even back then it was too, like the women now speak Spanish and speak it just as well as men, and are a lot of times have jobs. Yeah. Well, that was one thing I was going to say now that I've seen. Even yesterday I thought about it. I went into pizzeria looking for somebody. And there was hardly any Dicha sitting there eating, but there was also no Dicha working.
Oh, interesting.
And that's happening more to where they're just hiring for the day jobs or labor or whatever. Like they've taken in more business and they're just hiring Spanish. And the way it's looking, I don't think it's the best. It doesn't look good the way it's working out right now. Yeah. But that was always, I mean, you'd have the Dicha go to Canada and do the field work and come back and kind of almost like just chill, relax here throughout the year. They could. Some of them had these little things going, but like us, my dad would try these different businesses when we'd come back. But never nothing solid because you had 5 or 6 kids picking tomatoes for a season that could make enough wages to kind of sit out the winter.
Yeah, for sure.
But now, so you'd have the teacher go over there and do the field work and not the most desirable work, and then come back and maybe even do it here. But now it's kind of turned to where they will hire the Spanish, Mexicans, and especially the Indians, the Tarahumara, which I know there's a lot of taking advantage there just naturally, because they will come for the season now and pick apples.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's happening more and more where the teacher are taking in businesses and just hiring.
And so that idea of kind of like a labor class of Mexicans and Tarahumara and kind of owner class of Mennonites in a way.
Or what?
Like how you see the difference between like the laborers are primarily Mexican and Tarahumara, and then the owners a lot of times are Mennonite.
Yeah, more and more. Like you can see it in the restaurants.
Yeah.
Like even from the time that I've been here more since 2010 Bible school, even in these years, like farmers, when at the beginning there was usually mostly Deitch, or at least half Deitch, and same with pizzeria. And I didn't see a single Deitch yesterday working.
Yeah.
And I might have missed one, but same thing as farmers. Those are just a few examples, but it's changed even in the last 8 years.
Yeah.
All now is the thing. And I think it still kind of is a thing, with the Deitch, some of these Deitch saying, well, we don't work on Sundays, but hire Max out for Sunday. And that, I think that's still
for sure.
Which it's changing a little where Deitch are not as, okay, they'll work on Sunday, it's not that big of a deal, but still now it's not religious that they want the day off, it's just they want the day off.
Yeah.
Back then it was, well, even when it was religious, it wasn't religious. It was like, oh, he's only schofen. But really, it wasn't anything that sacred. And especially for the younger, a lot of times they would say, oh, Sonntag nicht schofen, we can't work on Sunday, but they would go and get drunk.
Yeah.
And, we're supposed to hold the day for God. And it's like, doesn't matter what you do on that day as long as you're not working. For some reason.
Yeah.
But that's changing a little. And but then it was, well, if you needed something done, then hire somebody that's not a Deitch.
Yeah. Let's see. So the name of this project is Rebels, Exiles, and Bridge Builders. Which of these words, if any, would you use to describe your cross-cultural interactions and why?
If I'd use one of those for myself, it would be Bridge Builders, but not that I have proactively been doing or any projects or any kind of ministry, but then at the same time, here I am in the Pro-Teacher school, but at least in theory, I think I have no problem with the interracial thing, and I have no problem being among other races, like I've done it for short periods and that's not, but I don't see myself as a rebel or an exile. I see myself as, I guess if you're thinking exile, you mean on the outside of the Deitch, right? So, in a sense, I'm not exiled. Not a rebel. Not trying to tear anything down. But the closest would be Bridge Builder, and I think that, but not that I can say, oh, I'm doing these things proactively, but I would push toward, it is amazing that it's always the business that brings people together, the money, and then in churches where the lines are drawn. But that's still, and I don't know how that'll change fast.
Yeah.
Or I don't know that it needs to change literally everywhere, but there should always be this openness, like why is it so exclusive, or why, even if you don't say, oh, Mexicans can't come here, but there's a reason they would never come.
Yeah.
And I think that's kind of felt when they do come. It's like, oh, this isn't really the time or the place.
Yeah.
But I think in a way, I mean, there is progress. There are steps, like at the school with these events that are happening. And that's even, that I was going to say before about the rehab, the way that it was founded was across denominations. Like that's a big step.
Yeah.
So even with the school, that's a big step with the school, that it's not a denominational thing. So there are some denominations that have been close to it, like the old colony, but in the last few years, they've rented the place. Like that's a big step, big sign.
Yeah.
But that the Spanish for events are using the place. And sometimes they are events that the Spanish and the Dicha do together. So I think some of the biggest things happening there are those kinds of things that are good.
Yeah, absolutely. And just to kind of close everything out, are there any hopes that you have for future interactions between cultures here in the Campos, or just hopes that you have for the Campos in general for the future? Yeah,
I would I would hope that like now there are so many coming from Canada all these years from the States, they would prefer English over Spanish. I would hope that eventually it'd become that they'd be as open to Spanish as they were to English, and that it wouldn't. Yeah, and even for myself, these years not learning much Spanish, I think is a negative. Well, it is a negative for me. And it is, I come here and I work at the school and I go to restaurants, things like that, and learn to understand a little and learn a little greetings and things like that. But it should be more. It should be more of learn. Yeah, my hope would be to learn to understand and appreciate the culture you're in or surrounded by, or especially the culture or language of the land.
Yeah.
That I think it's an obligation for, even if you want to keep your language, that we're obligated to learn the language and culture of that we're surrounded in. And especially like all these years, the wandering Dicha, getting privileges in places, things like that. One of those privileges has been to keep your language, but then to refuse to learn the language of the land, it's just a necessity. But it can also be a thing of more than or to do it for more than a necessity. So when it was just, okay, it's a necessity, so you just have the few men that lead, or the few men that go to town, learn it just to do whatever they need to survive. But I would hope that it's more than a necessity, or that it's like we're actually relational. We're actually, there's more of a bond than just this, we just want to sell you something. What would you like to, or just want to buy something. So I would hope that the relations become more than just business.
Cool.